Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this next video in our Army Painting Craftworld series, we're going to take a look at Biel-Tan. We're going to take a look at a few simple recipes and techniques to get this striking scheme ready for the tabletop. So let's paint. Over a black primer, we're going to start out with our shadow colour. Now in this case it's a nice grey. This is Dark Sea Grey by Tamiya. Because we're doing a white scheme, I'm choosing not to do any pre-shading, where I would put white over black and create the different tones. And because it's white, we may as well just start from our shadow and work up to our highlight. White covers really well through the airbrush and greys and whites, so it's the simplest way to do it. And by using Tamiya, I can dilute this about 3 or 4 parts thinner, that's Tamiya X28 thinner to paint, and slowly build up these layers of grey, which already is going to give me a nice variation of tones on the model. I'm spraying at about 25 psi and I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in the airbrush. The first few steps are airbrush, but if you don't have access to one, grab a rattle can that's a nice light grey or off-white, spray it up and you'll be good to go with the later stages. Now our main colour is going to be Ulthuan Grey, which is a very, very light grey. And I'm spraying this over the model. I'm generally taking a sort of zenithal approach where it's going to be lighter from some directly above, but I am angling it slightly. And if we look at the model, this sort of golden angle, a bit awkward when I'm painting on its side like that, but the golden angle sort of coming from the left as we look at the front of the model. So I'll try and make sure that the parts of the model that are facing that direction are a little bit lighter than those that aren't. Now this is the air version of the paint. I've used this specifically. I've thinned it with my normal acrylic airbrush thinner. I think this is life colour I'm using at the moment. But the air paints, they are formulated to go through an airbrush easier. Doesn't mean that they're ready diluted or anything. Just means they've got some additives in them that helps. So I've thinned it to the consistency I want it, which is probably slightly more thinner than paint. And we're good to go with a couple of coats. And then a final highlight, I'm going to use pure white. And for this we're using Tamiya again, and this is flat white XF2. So back to the Tamiya thinners to mix this with, and again thinned right down, 4 parts thinner to paint. And here I'm just focusing on those key highlight areas. And although this is the only white we're actually using, hopefully you're seeing that the model is now appearing very white, but with a nice bit of nuance in it. I'm very excited about this scheme because I'm trying out a recipe for a different project on this guy. So I was well chuffed when this worked out when I was doing it. It's also not helping me not want to collect Eldar. Of course, the other colour on the Eldar is the green. And to help us mask off the work we've already done and be able to use the airbrush to speed the process up across the army, we're going to use a liquid mask, so liquid latex. The brand I'm using here is Humbrol. It's the one I've got on I've got on the best with from the different brands. And to apply it, I'm using a little cocktail stick and then effectively capillary action. I'm just touching it to the model and letting it sort of wick itself into the recesses. It dries fairly quickly. This is sped up ever so slightly, this footage. But you know, you've got 30 seconds or so easily to work around with this. And when it's ready and dry, it'll just go more or less see-through. As you can see there, sort of glossy. Once that's dry, we can spray over. Now we've used 3 paints for the whites. Let's keep the green simple. Going to use Games Workshop Ork Flesh contrast paint. Looks absolutely fantastic. If I was doing this over a larger model, say like one of the tanks or that reverse scheme where we use a lot more of the green, then I'd probably use Dark Angels contrast paint to add a little bit more interest into the shadows and help create a few more tones. But on a small piece of a model like this, just the head, this straight over a pre-shade works absolutely fine. And you can see the pre-shade was created naturally earlier because we're doing a white scheme. Now as long as your paints are dry, you don't need to worry about varnishing or protecting them or anything with any of these masks. So just give them time, have a cup of tea, let them dry. And then to remove the latex, I'm aiming into the eye socket, so if I do scratch the paint underneath, it really doesn't matter. And once you can get a little bit of it up, it comes off very, very simply. And we're just going to use a little bit of blue tack to attach to it and then help pull the whole thing off. And if we do need to touch up any of the areas, we can use a dark grey, it's nice and simple, or more likely in this case we might need to add a little bit of green on the ridges around the mask. Again, simple, we'll just brush paint the contrast on over the white and it will look lovely. To prepare the model for the next stage, so both the body and the head, I'm going to give it a gloss varnish. I'm using Tamiya Clear here. Just use whatever varnish you like to use through your airbrush. The goal here is simply to have a glossy surface. And that's because we're going to use an oil wash. I'm going to use a grey here, a Smoke by Absalom 502. So I take a little dot of the oil into a metal mixing dish. I'm using an old brush here because it will wreck your brushes. I'm using mineral spirits. I'm using artist grade low odour spirits, Sansador by Winsor Newton. Just mix it thoroughly and just check the consistency of it on the side of your mixing dish. We're not looking for a particularly heavy wash here, particularly thick wash, but we also don't really want to have to apply it too many times to get the desired effect. This is just something you'll get used to as you use the product. And the purpose of us doing this pin wash now effectively is to add a little bit more definition to all the parts of the model, so a little bit more darkness in the recesses. And you can see as we just touch the paint to the model, it's whipped into all those recesses and leaves the flat areas mainly clear. If you do get a splodge on an area that you don't want it, as long as you're quick enough, you can just wipe it off with a brush straight away. If you go away and leave it for an hour or two, don't worry, just pop your brush into some thinner again, gently work away the area and you can remove the paint, no problem at all. If you're enjoying this tutorial, obviously hit the like button, subscribe, all the usual jazz. But if you'd like to support us further and you fancy getting a more in-depth tutorial every week on top of our YouTube ones, then consider checking out and supporting our Patreon. And thanks ever so much to all of you that do already. You're enabling us to create all this content. We've got a lot more exciting things coming for you in the very near future. Now I've left this for about an hour to dry, went and had a cup of tea, came back, popped the hairdryer on it, high heat, low power, 30 seconds or so. Once it was dry enough like that, I've chosen to use an ultra matte varnish. I'm using Ammo by MIG here. And this is just to unify the finish on the model, because obviously it had that slightly glossy finish from the clear and the recesses were very, very matte because of the oil paint. This way we just unify it all, make it look cohesive. Always, I find with ultra matte, be careful, spray one coat, let it dry, check out the finish because it can go very, very quickly. Now the final step for our armour is to add a little bit more interest to it, as well as definition. So I'm sort of edge highlighting here. I've taken Vallejo Watercolour White, it's my current favourite white paint, sort of for using with the paintbrush. And I'm just going to work my way around the edges, just tapping the brush gently against them. This is going to help represent chipping and whatnot, but it's also a kind of edge highlighting. Now because Biel-Tan are known as a particularly aggressive craft world, they enjoy the sort of melee stuff, I thought I'd have a bit of fun and do a bit more battle damage on this guy than say I would on some of the other craft worlds. But all I would suggest is you do a small bit of damage, work your way around most of the model, or certainly a decent area on the model, before you decide if you want to add some more. For instance, if I just worked on his abs, and the abs and the buns on these guys are outrageous, if you want to work on sort of that area, if I was to then build it up and really heavily damage it and decide I didn't like it, well, what am I going to do on the rest of the model now? It's not going to look cohesive across the rest of the model, so just take your time building it up. And then for the green, I'm going to use Games Workshop Moot Green as the chipping colour, partly because it's a lot lighter, but also I've always loved that real sort of yellow-green highlight that you see on a lot of the Biel-Tan models. Now for the gems and the eye lenses on this guy, we're going to go for red. Rather than me film it again on this model, I'm going to use the Ulthuan one we did recently. So we're starting off with a base coat of Mephiston Red, over 80% of the gem. Then the opposite corner to where we're going to put the white dot, we're going to do a little crescent of orange. I'm using Fire Dragon Bright here. Now I wanted to pump up the colour a little bit with this, so I'm just using a Blood Angels Red contrast paint, basically an ink over the top of it. I could have cut the stages down and just mixed a little bit of that in to the Mephiston Red if I'd wanted. That would be even quicker. Because then what I wouldn't have to do is reapply the little orange highlight like I have to do on this. And then in the opposite corner to where we've done that little orange crescent, we can put our reflection dot, just a little white dot. And then with all my gems, I like to put a bit of gloss varnish on them at the end. Looks good on the table, doesn't look quite as good in photographs, so it's up to you. And I'm going to use exactly the same recipe for the eye lenses. Now, although I'm doing blue eye lenses on this Ulthuan head you can see here, the process is exactly the same. So we would apply the base coat of Mephiston Red, we will put our highlight in using the orange, and the highlight just wants to follow the shape of the eye lens. So it's sort of a bit of a triangle here, so slightly more towards the centre of the face and fade that line out. And then we just do a little white dot up in the corner. So nice and simple, 3 colours. And there are a lot of gems and lenses and whatnot on the Eldar models, but the rest of it's so quick to paint you can afford to take a little bit of time, I think, to do these little details. So speaking of details, I painted the rest in here, and I thought, oh, I'll go purple with the hair and stuff on it, that'll look nice. And obviously, yes, it looks loads like Buzz Lightyear now, I realise that, but I still think it looks pretty cool. For the purple, all I've used is P3 beaten purple, and then I added a bit of white in to highlight it. So just keep it nice and simple. There's no point wasting tons of time on those details. The whole point of this army painting is to get it looking cool, but get it on the table nice and quickly. Now the weapons, I've just base coated with black. I've used Vallejo Watercolour black, and done the little tippy-tappy chipping along the edges by adding a touch of white into that to create a grey. And what I'm going to do now is take a brown oil. I think I've used burnt umber here, but it really doesn't matter what it is, just a brown oil. And I'm going to wash that all over the black parts of the model, just to add a little bit more interest to them. And because I said with Biel-Tan it's nice to scuzzy them up a bit, lots of damage, I'll do a little bit of this around the base of the model as well to create a bit of dirt and grime. We don't need to do any varnishing or anything, the model's absolutely safe to put this oil straight over. And there it is done with the base. It's amazing me how quickly these Eldar models come together once you've got that armour done, even more so than when I'm doing Space Marines and things like that. I think getting a good looking Eldar army together is so incredibly achievable now, given the tools and the paints and things that we've got access to. And as I said earlier, if you haven't got the airbrush, don't worry about those airbrushes stage, just get that flat coat on there. It's these techniques that we're using afterwards, the oils, the washes, the little chipping along the edges, that's what's really bringing life to the model. You can absolutely apply that whether you brush paint or airbrush paint, doesn't make any difference. The base, I've done our usual scheme. I'll pop the pigments I've used down in the description, and I'll link the video up in the top as to how you go about it. I think this guy's come out probably second favourite to Ulthuan for me at the moment, as in for tempting me to paint an army. I really loved it when Biel-Tan got their sort of redo back in the late 90s, early noughties I think it was. I can still remember those white dwarfs where the scheme came out, so it's really nice to actually get to have a go and paint one of them. I hope you're enjoying this Eldar series. There's a few more to come, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any of those coming. And as I said earlier, if you do enjoy the video, hit that like button. It really does help support us. If you have a go at the scheme, make sure to tag us. I'd love to see what this looks like across a collection. And I'll see you next time.